Add excitement to your holidays with Ohio Lottery Holiday Scratch-Offs, including $1 holiday cash and $5 holiday lucky times 10, or Holiday Bonus Millions with a 200 times multiplier and a $2 million top prize. Plus, enjoy second chance drawings where you can win 10 times, 100 times, or 1,000 times the price of your ticket. Scratch-offs make the perfect gift, and best of all, there's no wrapping required. Lottery players are subject to Ohio laws and commission regulations. Play responsibly.
Welcome to Mind Love Premium, episode 80. Today's episode is all about becoming who you are designed to be.
And sometimes we get triggered and sometimes we get defensive, but there is a tendency to look within and try and dissect or excavate what in me is causing me to feel this way. And so when we bring it to the table, it's a conversation about how we're co-creating this experience. It's not a conversation around like, why did you do this thing to me? And why am I a victim in this situation?
Are you using anger habitually as a way to protect your heart? Like a lot of times when people express anger fully, it turns into sadness. It turns into tears. It turns into melting. It turns into, actually, I'm really just vulnerable, right? And so that's when you're now really alchemizing the energy into something new.
If you're new to Mind Love, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. And here's your personal reminder to tap that little subscribe button. That way, you'll get reminders to give your mind a little love when new episodes release. And if you love the show, consider leaving a 5-star review. These help me entice all the amazing guests that you hear on the show. Today, I'm excited to share a review from Rats of Nim, who says, Melissa Monte is amazing. She's charismatic and curious, interesting and inspiring. Plus, I just love listening to her voice. Each episode is designed to make your life better, and you'll enjoy the ride. Highly recommend. Well, thank you, Rats. Is Rats your first name? May I call you Rats? I so appreciated this review. It's kind of like being called pretty first thing in the morning. So thank you for taking the time. And now let's get to it. Question for you. Who are you becoming? And do you contemplate this question as much as you contemplate who you've been and who you are? What does the idea of becoming even mean to you? Does it mean all the ways you need to change to get to where you want to be? And which part of you is changing? I spend a lot of time asking myself questions like these, in meditation, on long drives or walks, or just gazing into nothing and letting my thoughts untangle. And recently, I've realized that my ideas on who I'm becoming have been shifting. But more than that, my ideas on how I become have changed. I used to always say that life is like a video game and you have to level up your character. So I was always seeking to learn new skills and to get certifications and even make myself prettier. The goal was to give myself as many options as possible. And that's how a lot of people think about life. Get the good job, make the money, start a family, big house, nice car, level up year after year if possible. But as I grow, especially spiritually, becoming to me isn't about leveling up my character anymore. If anything, it's more about seeing through my character. There's a lot of talk in the spiritual world about shedding our egos. And I do think that is a path that holds value. But why are we in this human experience if the only purpose is to try to transcend out of it? I believe that we are all aspects of God having a human experience. I remember hearing in a spiritual lecture years ago that God yearned to experience itself, so its consciousness split into infinite pieces. And I'll be honest, at the time I had no idea what that meant. But the more I sit with it or have conversations around it, the more I grasp what it really means. It means that your path here is important to understanding divinity, because your life is a full realization of one possibility of existence. So everyone's perspective is valuable. Everyone's understanding of life and of themselves is valuable, because it's all a fragment of the truth of all that is. And all of these fragments together is what creates the infinite in possibilities. Which also means that our egos have value. I did an episode for premium members a while back called The Ego and God Are One. It's a really great one, exclusive episode 17 for anyone interested in going back. But the thing is, I don't think the point is to indulge our egos or to shed them completely. but to integrate them with our true selves. To remember who we truly are while also remembering why we came here to Earth School. Maybe merging of soul and persona is true mastery of the game of life. And that involves embracing all of our biggest challenges as curriculum and savoring the full spectrum of life. So today we're diving into the idea of becoming who we are designed to be. Our guests are Azrya and Ben Bequer, the co-founders of Beqoming, spelled with a Q, a platform that provides transformational tools, stories, and media to help people see beyond the veil of who they thought they were supposed to be. 3 key things we will learn are how to get the most of your soul curriculum, how to know if you're resisting or embracing your genius, and the 3 stages of becoming. Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up or text the word morning to 33777. And now let's welcome Ben and Azrya Bequer to the show.
It's an honor to be here.
So what's your background and what inspired you to focus your message around this idea of becoming?
We've both been on a deep journey of transformation for a long time, many years individually. And when we met, we just saw how we both had really powerful puzzle pieces to put together. And I had been working deeply in the plant medicine, shamanic, emotional, sort of psycho-spiritual realm. And that was my happy place, my field of expertise. And B was much more on the kind of, intellectual, analytical, personal development side of things, having been a very successful businessman, entrepreneur, CEO for a long time. He had really developed a very comprehensive plan with which to guide his life, which is now called the Beqoming operating system. And so those were the 2 very masculine, feminine, left brain, right brain energies that informed what is now called Beqoming, which is kind of our love child. It's a transformational platform. Beqoming is spelled with a Q, should mention that. And the Q really represents the essential questions, the willingness to ask questions. So I think what got us to where we are today and what inspired us to create what we've created is just this thirst, this hunger to know ourselves and to know the nature of reality. And the way we got here is through asking deep, powerful, impactful questions of ourselves and then actually listening to the answers coming from the depths of our soul.
I know personally that ability to ask questions and just kind of challenge the thoughts is what creates the disruption to be able to change them. But what does that process look like for you to actually ask a question? Because I know a lot of people struggle with this idea, if I already know the answer, why do I need to ask myself that? So what does that intentional process look like?
Well, it depends. I guess what I'd say as well to that is I like to say knowing is the opposite of learning. And so it's not about knowing the answer per se. It's about always asking the essential questions. Even if you think the process of asking is what allows for more learning. The minute you step into knowing, you stop learning. And so I think that's a critical component to it. And so I think that it's less important of what modality or how you ask the question. I think the important thing is to always and continuously ask the question. And it's a paradox because it's the asking that is the personal development journey. And you're always trying to find the answer and simultaneously knowing that you will never actually know. The most critical question is who am I and why am I here? And you will never truly know. And the personal development journey is about asking that question and actually listening for the answers and paradoxically knowing that you'll never know, never fully know.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add to that, the quality of the question determines the quality of the answer. So, if you're asking an essential question, you probably don't yet know the answer, right? We're not talking about should I have spaghetti for dinner? Those are not the questions we're talking about. We're talking about, who am I? Why am I here? That's the very generic way to ask that question. And we like to always take these things that are very universal and sort of fine tune them or make them unique in their approach, because it changes the way we think about things. So the way that we've adapted that is like, who are you designed to be? So to ask yourself that question, who am I designed to be? It's a really powerful question to sit with. And very likely you won't necessarily know the full answer. As Benjamin said, you'll probably never know the full answer, but you can start to uncover, like a scavenger hunt, through asking that question over and over again and listening to the answer and then taking action from the listening. If you're asking yourself that question, if you're early on your path and you're like, who am I designed to be? Like, I think I know who I am, right? I'm a mom, I'm a coach, I'm a teacher, I'm a gardener, like whatever the identity is that you've taken on consciously or unconsciously, that you've sort of just adapted into your sense of self, it all is up for debate, we would say, right? It's like, cool, well, maybe that's who you think you are right now, but is that really who you were designed to be in the long run? And do you want to change that? Do you want to change how you relate to yourself? And because you can, through the power of choice, through the power of self-inquiry, through the power of receiving medicine from different angles, different directions, opening up new neural pathways in your brain, having new experiences. Your life could be completely different in a year if you choose that it should be, or it could be exactly the same.
And the paradox of it all is you are none of those things. You are not a housewife, a school teacher, or any of those things. That's not who we truly are. And so it's the paradox of finding your purpose, but not being attached to an identity.
Yeah, I know for me, for a really long time in my life, I did not know how to listen to my own internal guidance. I used to joke that the universe had to punch me in the face to make a turn. And it did, over and over again. And a lot of the things that I felt like were these life-ruining moments, in hindsight, I was able to look back and see, oh, you were taking away options to make my path clearer. So I'm curious for you guys, what are some of those, the life experiences or the ways that question, who are you designed to be, was revealed to you through asking?
I resonate with what you said about being a slow learner and having to get hammered by the universe. I think our greatest challenges are frequently our greatest paths for growth. And when you look at the universe as benevolent and working for us, then you have to believe that every time those challenges come up or those pivotal obstacles come up in our lives, it's the universe giving you curriculum or traction for you to move forward. And so for me, one of my rock bottom moments in recent years was a massive lawsuit that I got myself into. There was actually we call it a gift wrapped in thorns, a blessing in disguise that forced me to evaluate where I was out of integrity with my life and where I wasn't, doing what I said I was going to do. And that led me on the journey of building a new operating system, as Azrya mentioned, for my life, which ended up being a foundational component to the Beqoming process, the coaching process, where we help people build a new operating system for their lives. And it was that, traumatic, awful experience that birthed a whole new expression of myself. And it was the universe giving me an obstacle that would give me the opportunity to grow into the highest expression of myself.
Yeah, and I would add to that, it was like your identity was so attached. You were so attached to the identity of being the one who makes, large amounts of money. Like that was the identity. Like I know myself as this person who can make money. And so, when this business deal fell into your lap, even though he said he wanted to live with more purpose and not chase the dollar, his identity was so used to that pattern of being like, well, this is a deal I can't pass up, that he made a choice to go down a road he knew in his heart wasn't in alignment with where he really wanted to go. And it's tough, right? Because we're creatures of habit and we get very attached to our identities and all of the habitual programs and patterns that come with that identity. And so to really make a shift in our internal and external state is it takes a lot of energy and life force to say, actually, no, I'm not going to do the thing that I would normally do, that my concept of who I know myself to be today would do, but I'm going to start acting from the place of who I want to become, right? And I'm going to start making decisions from the place of who I'm striving to be or aspiring to be. And I think that's a big part of the journey. And yeah, it takes a lot of rock bottom moments to get there usually.
Yeah, it's like I was digging myself out for far too long, but the process of that it brings so much clarity on its own that these things that I had so much regret for in the beginning ended up becoming these life moments that I teach about and I share about. But one of the biggest hurdles to unravel was, like you said, these habits run deep. And sometimes our habits of thought are even around not even just who we think we are or what we've identified with, but these things that we think we want. And I know you guys talk about the difference between what people think they want versus the ability to receive everything that they didn't know they wanted. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Black Friday is coming, and for the adults in your life who love the coolest toys, well, there's something for them this year too. Bartesian is the premier craft cocktail maker that automatically makes more than 60 seasonal and classic cocktails, each in under 30 seconds at the push of a button. And right now, Bartesian is having a huge site-wide sale. You can get $100 off any cocktail maker or cocktail maker bundle when you spend $400 or more. So, if the cocktail lover in your life has been good this year, or the right kind of bad, get them Bartesian. At the push of a button, make bar-quality cosmopolitans, martinis, Manhattans, and more. All in just 30 seconds. All for $100 off. Amazing toys aren't just for kids. Get $100 off a cocktail maker when you spend $400 through Cyber Monday. Visit bartesian.com/cocktail. That's BARTESIAN.com/cocktail.
The difference between what people think they want versus the ability to receive everything that they didn't know they wanted. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
For sure. Yeah. Like, an example is we think we want happiness, but what we really want is the capacity to really savor the full spectrum of our aliveness, which includes grief and gratitude and love and heartbreak and like everything in between, because we're full spectrum beings, right? We have the capacity to feel in so many directions. And yet, even those who are on the personal development path, a lot of times are still like in this trap of thinking what the goal is happiness. But I would say the goal is actually just the willingness to feel it all fully, and that's why we love that word savoring. Another example is we think we want harmony in our relationships. And of course we do, right? But what we really want is an honest, authentic, and trustworthy reflection of ourselves through the eyes of another, which will inherently trigger all of our deepest wounds and insecurities, forcing us to evolve. That's actually what our soul wants. So it's not always going to be comfortable. It's not always going to be harmonious. And if we can start to make peace with that and embrace that, it completely changes the game. So I think, it's so easy to get caught in the trap of what we think is obvious, right? Of course we want these things. And there's a deeper cut underneath that you can't get to until you actually start to ask the questions and sit with like, well, why do I really want this? And because this whole idea of happiness being the goal, it's really a trap. It's not possible to just always be happy all the time. In fact, it's boring, in my opinion. Yeah. So the way I think about it sometimes is like, we've all heard that metaphor of the well-trodden path, right? Like it's so much easier to take the path that's already well carved versus taking the machete and making our way through the wild, thick forest. But if you think of your neural pathways in that way, like there's certain grooves that are just anchored that are very easy for your brain to continually take, but they might not be leading you where you really want to go. And so to actually groove a new pathway is equivalent to taking a machete and making your way through the thick of your subconscious, your fears, your insecurities, your shadow material. All of that is really the juicy part, I think, of the human experience. And yet we don't have tools to navigate that in our normal day-to-day lives, in our school system. Like, how come shadow work is not one of the most important parts of the curriculum of, standard education programs? Like, it's just completely ignored. And yet so many people are dealing, whether people who are incredibly successful or people who are just scraping by, we're all dealing with the same stuff. Insecurity, unworthiness, fear of failure, fear of success. it's actually not that complicated. These are all the things that unify and unite us as a human family, and yet we're so conditioned to repress and deny these aspects.
I think a lot of people come to us thinking they want, let's say you say, I want to be a millionaire, or I want to have this special home that's going to give me all this security. And I think one of the things that we do is just those essential questions keep going deeper, right? And so you might say, well, okay, why do you want the house? Well, I want to provide for my family. I want us to feel safe and secure and live in this neighborhood. And it's, well, why can't you feel safe and secure where you're at now? Or why can't you have those feelings that you're desiring? Because at the end of the day, the thing you desire, that goal, that material thing, is really a desired feeling underneath it. And so it's really important to unpeel the onion and find out what those deeper desired feelings are and why you can't attain those feelings in your current situation. And we're not trying to say it's wrong to want that house, but it's important to understand why and really work at the root so that the house is just gravy, but you can have that feeling without it, as an example. And so that's how we get to the everything you didn't know you wanted. What you really wanted is to feel safe and secure in your own body. And let's work on that. And then secondarily, let's work on, manifesting this home that you'd love to live in.
Right. And the paradox is that when you feel safe, confident, fulfilled, and at home in your body, you become a vibrational match to that dream house, right? Because now you're already in the frequency of that. And so then it coming into your life is much easier because you're not coming from a place of lack. And also I should share that for those of you who are resonating and are like, well, what essential questions should I ask myself? We do have questions also at the end of every chapter in our book that are really powerful. And if you actually spend time sitting with them and journaling on them, like, they will transform your life.
Yeah, I remember for so long, especially in my 20s, early 20s, I used to move a lot. And I always thought that the next city was the place that would be more fulfilling for all of these reasons. I had 100 reasons for each one. So I was fully convinced. And then I'd get there and all those things that I thought I wanted would be there. But I was so used to, part of it wasn't even always that those things didn't fulfill me in some small way, but I had a habit of always looking for the things that I didn't have yet. And so even when I got the things, then I was still looking for the things I didn't have yet. And I think this last I moved from Los Angeles up to Big Bear Lake was the first time that I really did that soul work to figure out, like, why am I moving? Are these for the real reasons? And I knew it was because I was addicted to all the conveniences of LA, to the Uber Eats and the Uber and the walk to the store and like the drinks on the corner. And when I moved here, it was all the things that I'm like, okay, I know that those aren't the things that are going to help me blossom into who I want to be. I want to be in nature and I want the simplicity and I want to see who I am without all of these things. And it was difficult. It was still a really hard transition for me, but I knew that it was closer to what I wanted for myself and for my new baby at the time. But I'm curious, one of the questions that you do invite people to ask themselves is whether they're resisting or embracing their genius. And I'm curious, how would somebody know if they're resisting their genius?
I think we have to distinguish between knowing, like lowercase knowing and uppercase knowing. So in the book, we distinguish between the two. And when Benjamin was saying, all knowing is the opposite of learning, he's talking about the lowercase knowing, which is like the intellectual mind having assimilated information and then gotten locked into that information as quote unquote truth, right? And once it's decided, then there's no room for it to evolve or shift. The knowing in all caps, which is what would be a necessity to tap into in order to answer that question, is the knowing that exists beyond the intellectual mind. It's the knowing that comes from the whispers of your soul, your intuition, as you called it earlier, your inner guidance system. And you can cultivate a relationship with that. And it takes time, and it takes spaciousness, and it takes stillness. It takes introspection. It takes willingness to feel things that might be in the way. It takes willingness to let go of distractions and numbing and all the things that can, distort it. But I think when you communicate with that knowing, and we all have it, we all have access to it, even if the pilot flame is super, super low, it will communicate to us and it wants us to live our genius. It wants us to be the fullest expression of who we came here to be, whatever that looks like, right? And again, who you were designed to be is unique to you, and only you can decide what that expression of your genius is. But I would say your genius is always intimately connected to you living wholeheartedly. Like when you live wholeheartedly and you're fully all in, you're fully immersed, your heart is wide open, no matter what you're doing, whether you're gardening, or you're on stage in front of thousands of people, the wholeheartedness is a huge key to unlock your genius. So even if you don't know what your genius is, maybe a preemptive question could be, am I living wholeheartedly in whatever I'm doing? And if the answer is no, which it would be for most people, then the follow-up question is, well, why? And maybe the reason is because you're not doing the thing you were designed to be. And it's really hard to live wholeheartedly when you're trying to do something that is actually not really true for you. But sometimes walking the path of truly being who you're designed to be means letting go of an entire identity that you've created, which can be very scary. So I think, it's never black and white, right? It's never just a one-word answer. But I think you will know, capital no, if you are resisting your genius when you actually stop and you slow down enough to really listen.
Yeah, I'd answer maybe a simpler way to look at it is, if you don't know if you're living your genius or your dharma or your purpose, then that is probably the answer that you're not. Because if you are,
you'll know.
You know. And so if there's a question like, I don't know if this is what I should be doing with my life, the answer is probably no, because when you are, it's like a full body yes, like that full fuck yes. You just know, like with it's like, how do you know you're in love? You just know. And so through and through, if you're in doubt, if you're like, I don't know if I'm in love, well, you're probably not. And it's the same kind of energy. So it's, again, going back to the essential questions, just keep asking the essential questions. And your deeper knowing, as Azrya said, will guide the light.
You talk a lot about this kind of operating system around becoming that you started to create for your life. What are the stages of that operating system, and how did you uncover them basically for yourself from that process of that rock bottom that you were coming from?
Yeah. So the operating system is really comprised of one, a look backwards, like really telling your life story. And then through that lens, uncovering the themes and patterns of your life and really looking at those themes, not in a negative or a positive way, but a holistic way, right? And so if I have a pattern in my life, what is the light interpretation? Because our greatest gifts are also our greatest weaknesses, and right? So really understanding those themes and patterns that have got us to where we are, and understanding the shadow and the light interpretation. And then really doing an assessment of what are the filters that you're going to look in your life going forward? What is your why? And what are the promises to yourself, desired states of feeling? Because if you break down all your goals and aspirations, they're really at the core just desired states of feeling. You might want a private jet, but what you really want is a desired feeling. It's not the private jet. And so really breaking those down so you have filters with the why and your promises, desired states of feeling, to then look forward and what your future goals might look like. I created this system because I was in a place in my life where I couldn't trust myself to be in integrity with myself. And so I created this filter system to look forward. And then we further break it down into 4 archetypes. We don't have time on this podcast to get into it, but we look through the rearview mirror historically and also forward through these archetypes. There's 4 main archetypes that have different maturities. So there's 12 archetypes that we look at our lives through. And it's a really beautiful way to dissect when I'm in the shadow of this archetype or when I'm in the light of this archetype, to make it simple.
Yeah, I'm happy to give an example of that just because it can sound very abstract, I think. But archetypes are, for those of you who are familiar with like Joseph Campbell, but there's this idea that we all as humans have certain common denominators, certain particular ways of being that we can access within ourselves, right? So there's the mother, there's the father, there's the magician, there's the king and the queen. Like these are more of the sort of standard archetypes. And then the ones that we've really focused on, one of them is the archetype of the steward. And that archetype has a journey of maturation through it. So At the shadow expression, the steward is the consumer. So the archetype of the consumer. At the kind of the gift, the giving frequency or expression, the archetype of the steward is the archetype of the creator. And then the highest expression, it turns into the steward, if that makes sense. So you have sort of 3 levels to the same archetype. And so to look at your life through that lens and say, okay, if I want to step into stewardship in my life, right? I want to be the steward of a vision or a mission or a family or a community, and I want to take that role really as a leader. Where am I in patterns of consumption? Where am I in patterns of creation? And where am I in patterns of actual stewardship? And when you start to dissect it, it focuses the work, if that makes sense.
A simpler way to look at it is the shadow expression is when am I in a seeking energy, which is typically in the shadow expression, or when am I in a giving frequency, which is the evolution of that? When am I just emanating this expression? And that's a really interesting way to look at your life, both historically and moving forward. And I think it's a very powerful way to guide your life.
I love that the example that you used. I feel like I can resonate a lot. A pattern that's always come up in my life has been overindulgence or overconsumption. I just was always seeking outside of myself, for the next party, always being around people, party drugs all the time, then alcohol all the time. I was bulimic for a long time. And so all of these ways that just need to, weird. I talk about it all the time, and for some reason it just choked me up right now. But I just the need to always indulge in some way. And so my whole life has been kind of a process of unraveling that to get to my next level, including the last one, I think, was giving up alcohol finally. And just in doing that, the ability to create has come out so much more because there's room for that in my life rather than creation is a difficult process for a lot of people. You sit in front of a blank page if you're a writer, or you have to come up with the next idea, and it's just constant. It's not like you create once and you stop. If you're a creator, that's what you keep doing. But we're so used to consuming more and more that I think we forget these other ways of being that we could be in the world. And I think that comes back to, you talk about soul curriculum, but in order to actually access that soul curriculum, we have to answer the call, I think. Otherwise, we're just led by the way society is. And I get so many questions from people that are just like, I just need to find my purpose. Like it's this thing that they're going to find, and then they're going to like, oh, there it is, and everything's going to be fine. But explain the concept of the soul curriculum from your point of view and how you answer the call, really.
Yeah, so the idea of soul curriculum is basically that your soul has the desire to express itself in a particular way in this lifetime. And in order for it to mature into its fullest expression, it's going to require challenges and curriculum to advance, just like going to school. In order for us to graduate from high school and go to college, we take exams, right? We have to study, we have to learn, and all of those teachings are going to make us uncomfortable. They're going to have to exist outside of the realm of what we already know. They're going to have to force us to evolve, expand, push ourselves so that we can mature to that next level. And the soul curriculum is no different, except for instead of the teacher assigning it, it's like the universe is assigning it to you. That's how we sort of see it. So whether we like it or not, we're all enrolled in the game of life, and we all have our unique curriculum. And a lot of times curriculum really begins in childhood. It begins with the challenges that our childhood presents. And we talk a lot about trauma, and, trauma is a word that gets thrown around a lot in these sort of personal development, spiritual communities. But I think, the way we understand trauma is it's very broad. It can be anything from something what some might perceive as very subtle to something very extreme. I used to always see trauma as, people who went through like severe violence or rape or, that was sort of how I saw trauma. But I've come to learn that I've had trauma. I personally have had trauma in my childhood that was much more subtle than that, like having an emotionally unstable parent, for example, and being the only one to hold space for the parent is also traumatic on some level. And so we all have something. And for Benjamin, it was severe learning disabilities in school, and which created a really strong sense of not being safe in the world, because his whole world was school. And in school, he was terrified of being found out, of being an imposter, and that translated over the rest of his entire life. So these are like the crux pieces of our curriculum that get laid as a foundation. And then a lot of times, of course, we're not conscious of them, right? So we go through life and they're running us unconsciously. And when we start to awaken to the bigger picture of our life and we start to actively participate in our own evolution, we say yes to the exams. We're like, okay, I'm actively participating in this dynamic with the universe, and I want to evolve and I want to grow and I want to learn and integrate these lessons. We can start to, like zip files, unpack these stored memories, these repressed traumas, these experiences that have molded and shaped us. And we can start to see the gifts inside of them. So we really firmly believe that every quote unquote negative thing that's ever happened to you is actually a gift wrapped in thorns. It's a blessing. It's something that can inform your purpose, right? And I'm sure you've experienced this, where like some of your darkest moments have given birth to your true purpose, which is to be of service to others and share what you've learned and be a light for people to say, hey, here's someone who made it to the other side, Not that there's another side, but we're never there. We never became. We're always becoming. But certainly we can evolve dramatically. And I think that's really how we see soul curriculum.
I think it's pretty awesome that one of your traumas was overcoming a learning disability, and then now you're here writing and reading an audiobook. That's pretty awesome.
Full circle.
There's that was a journey for me. Azrya is a trained actress and walked into there and would just read a chapter like it was no big deal. That was very confronting for me to read the audiobook. I would practice my sections over and over. I would spend hours reading the material over and over. So I was really familiar with the cadence. And then I went into the studio and recorded it. And I would walk out just drenched in sweat, because there's still to this day a traumatic reflex of when the teacher would call on me to read something out loud. And I knew I was going to be a stuttering baboon. It was very difficult. And so even now as an adult, when I have to read out loud, it's a triggering experience, especially when you're making mistakes and they're having to edit it in real time. It's a lot of pressure for someone who's not comfortable reading out loud. And so it was really good curriculum for me.
My husband, when he was young, had trouble saying his like R's and L's for a long time and had to go to a special class to practice. And it's so interesting because when I met him, and even now, I think he's an amazing speaker. He has his own business. He's speaking to people all the time. I usually have to like consult with him when I have a difficult call, because he's just better at those things. And so sometimes little things will come up, and I majored in journalism. So I'm like, I know a lot of words. I'm just used to being like, oh, here's the definition for that. Just like not thinking much about it. And for a long time, that would sort of trigger him, because it was like hitting that childhood wound of I know how to speak type thing. And I'm like, I thought I was just sharing. And I know that one of the ways of being in a more conscious type of partnership is, like you said, it's not just to have an easy relationship, it's to be able to help each other see those shadow sides and work through them. But I also know that for me, when somebody hits up on those things that are so deeply ingrained, it's like my hard candy shell pops up, as I call it. It's like all of a sudden I'm shorter. I feel a little emotional. I don't even know why. I can't answer the questions. I'm like, I just don't want to talk about this. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that came up a lot when I was researching you guys really was so many people that know you personally talk about this way that you guys exist in partnership and are able to be that for each other. How do you work in those ways to help each other identify those things? And also whether it's to not kind of trigger that ego reflex, or personally to dissipate that within yourself while you're working to move forward with each other and evolve?
Well, I think in the book, we have this saying that Azrya loves is trust the triggers to teach. And so I think one of the big things that allows our relationship to just work a lot more fluidly is that when we are triggered, either of us, we will reflect on why we're triggered. And so when you're triggered, you're in co-creation. That wasn't something didn't happen to you to make you feel this way. There's something inside of you that's causing you to feel this trigger and this contraction around what's happening. And so we're constantly looking at ourselves first. So let's say something comes up for me, there's a pausing and a reflecting of like, what in me, what childhood wound, what is going on that I'm allowing this external factor to be triggered. And then we have a conversation. There's a tremendous amount of respect between us. And then we have a conversation about it. And so it might look like Azrya coming to me and saying, listen, I was triggered because you said X, Y, and Z. And I know that that's coming up from, a childhood wound related to abandonment issue or whatnot. We're just hypothetically speaking. And so she's bringing to the table ownership for the fact that she's allowing herself to be triggered by something that came up. And then we can have a conversation, and it's not I don't have to get defensive, right? I can be like, oh, wow, okay, I'm glad you brought that to my attention. And let's talk about how we move forward from that perspective. And so instead of getting defensive, and it's not to say we're not human, this is a practice. Trusting the triggers to teach is a practice that we, and sometimes we get triggered and sometimes we get defensive. Like we're not, angels over here, gurus sitting on mountaintops, but there is a tendency to look within and just try and dissect or excavate what in me is causing me to feel this way. And so when we bring it to the table, it's a conversation about how we're co-creating this experience. It's not a conversation around like, why did you do this thing to me? And why am I a victim in this situation?
Yeah, for sure. And I would say too, that there's a big difference between a reaction and a response. And sometimes that difference is like a millisecond, to just not fall into that habitual knee-jerk reaction of like, if something comes at you that doesn't feel good, the defense mechanisms kick in and they're like powerful, right? Because a lot of times, especially if they're related to childhood, they served you as a child to protect your heart, to protect yourself from whatever was happening. And so because they've served you, you may continue to use them unconsciously in your adult life where they're actually no longer serving you. They're getting in the way. They're preventing intimacy. So I think it's really about if you have two people on the same team, knowing we're on the same team always, knowing we're willing to take responsibility for what comes up. And also, I think another big thing that is often not mentioned when the subject is discussed is like the power of humor, to realize like, because the stuff that triggers us in our day-to-day relationships, in the grand scheme of things, I think most people can agree that it's pretty negligible. So like sometimes when we have annoyance with each other or frustration, it's like, how can you take that energy and just turn it into a joke or a laugh? And like, how can we diffuse it, like
literally an hour ago, we were in the car, Azrya's navigating, we're in Tulum, I don't know where I'm going. And she tells me at the last minute to make a right turn. And she's like, I told you 2 minutes ago. And I'm like, you want me to pull over, drop you off, and you can walk home like that lady right there? And it was a complete joke, right? But it came from a light place, right? Yeah. He could have said those same words and it could have been awful, but he said it from a place of like, I could tell he was joking. And one of my go-tos is like, are we having our first fight? Is this us having our first fight? And it just diffuses the energy and then it just goes away, versus like now it's a thing and we're both stewing in it, which is just not necessary. Yeah. And I think at the core of all of it is knowing that you're co-creating, like whether it's a trigger or a problem or anything happening in your life that's causing you to feel a certain way that doesn't feel good, is just always being conscious of the fact that you are co-creating that experience and you are not a victim. It didn't happen to you. You co-created that experience. And I think that when you look at life from that perspective, it's a game changer. It's a game changer.
I have such a similar go-to to lighten the mood when I'm thinking about all those things that I want to say. I'll just kind of take a deep breath and be like, we're fighting. And it immediately always lightens the mood. Yeah. But you're right, that co-creation is so important, because so often I look at different experiences and it can be something so mundane and it changes me in a way. Like even if it's just for the next 30 minutes of self-reflection that teaches me something that I take away. And a lot of times that's what moves me through my fear of things, like a confrontation with somebody. And I'm like, okay, I need to talk to this person about this. And it's like, even if nothing goes the way I want it to, I don't like maybe it's a fight with a friendship or something like that. And even if we end up not being friends after that, there's always something in that occurrence or in that just circumstance where then I learn how to communicate a little bit better, or, I understand how to not talk to somebody, whatever it is. And so just to move through it and be thankful rather than mulling back in the past and thinking, well, it could have gone this way, or I should have done this, or I don't know, all these ways that reality is wrong, which is just a fight you're always going to lose. But one of the things that you guys talk about too is that all feelings boil down to love or fear. So can you elaborate on that a little bit?
When you simplify it, because the terrain of emotions can be very complex, right? And it can feel overwhelming. But when you simplify it in that way, it's actually quite powerful, because then you really have to just understand, if you can understand love and fear at their core and you can identify them in your system, then all the emotions that surround them on the spectrum between the two opposites can be a lot easier to navigate. Like, for example, if I'm feeling anger, well, the anger is probably just the tip of the iceberg. Like, underneath the anger is fear of something, fear of loss of status, fear of, not being worthy, fear of abandonment, whatever the fear is. And the defense mechanism is expressing itself as anger. Now, when you know that, you can start to work with that in energy more intentionally, because that's all emotions are. They're just energy and motion. And they're such powerful tools with which to shape and mold our reality. And they're like colors, right, for the artist to paint life with. So, for example, if you feel there's just like the archetypes, there's layers, right? So maybe the very tip of the iceberg is like annoyance or frustration. Underneath that is anger. And then underneath that is despair. And underneath that is fear. And so you can sort of start to map how what are your go-to defense mechanisms? Are you using anger habitually as a way to protect your heart, or as a way to not feel afraid? If you can start to map that and see the pattern, and you can start to consciously work with the anger and express it to the point where you can, like, a lot of times when people express anger fully, it turns into sadness. It turns into tears. It turns into melting. It turns into, actually, I'm really just vulnerable. Right. And so that's when you're now really alchemizing the energy into something new. And I think that's the emotional mastery that is another like profound game changer in our human journey, and another thing that we've just never been given tools to navigate. And so the same is true on the love side of the spectrum. Gratitude, compassion, joy, these are all manifestations of love. And when we can tap into a feeling of pure love as a default state, it ripples into every other area of our life. So more than happiness, I would say the goal is love.
Yeah, I guess I'd just add to that. It's also very important to distinguish between fear, which is typically an illusion, and danger, right? There's a difference between there's a tiger standing right in front of me and I'm scared to go and speak in front of this audience. Typically, most fear is an illusion, and most fear is the fear of feeling something. And so when you relate to it that way, it often takes a little bit of the power and edge off of it. It's like, okay, I'm really just afraid of feeling stupid or dumb or unloved, whatever that might be. And so distinguishing between, fear and danger is really important as well, or at least it helps. So the awareness of that helps soften it a bit.
Yeah. And it seems like so much about the process of becoming is the willingness to kind of face that fear, because you're going to be coming up against these triggers and the emotions behind them, and looking at things that you've left covered up for maybe your whole lifetime. And so it's raw and, like you said, vulnerable. And so there's got to be a willingness to kind of be courageous through that in order to evolve as a person. And I want to know really the consequences of not choosing this, though, because one of the things that you guys talked about in your book is what happens when billions of people are carrying this unconscious pent up darkness from untouched emotions around their hearts, bodies, and minds. And really, what is the answer to that if we're not willing to step in this greater version of ourselves?
And I think we're living it, we're living the manifestation of what happens when you repress and deny your shadow and you don't look at your traumas and your fears, because we're actually already living in the reality of that. We live really in a world mostly designed on the foundation of fear and separation. And it's gnarly. And I think people are waking up to that more and more. And I think the pandemic and, what's happening in the Ukraine and like all of the mayhem, the climate crisis, these are all manifestations of our relationship to our undigested shadow. And the beauty of all of these extreme things that are occurring externally is that they're catalysts, they're wake-up calls. They're like our own internal system is ringing the alarm bell and going, hey, look, there's a war happening in Europe. Where am I at war with myself? How am I co-creating this? How am I actually a part of this? Even though I may live in a completely different part of the world, I am co-creating the war in the Ukraine if I'm not actively healing the parts of myself that I've rejected, abandoned, judged, hated. If I'm not healing the rift in my own heart, if I'm not doing that work and I'm at war with myself, then I'm contributing to it, because as above, so below, as within, so without. And so like, there is no separation. It's a completely different mindset than how we're, conditioned to see the world. And I think that, we don't have to wonder what that would look like. I think we're living it. And I think if there isn't a dramatic shift in consciousness, which I believe is happening, but if there isn't one that ripples into the global mainstream, public space, it's only going to continue to get more intense until enough people are willing to start doing the inner work and start feeling the stuff they need to feel.
There's a good quote that we love from Jim Dethmer, which is, what are you willing to risk for full aliveness? And I think that's another essential question that we ask ourselves often. And so what discomforting feelings are you willing to feel to be fully alive? And I think asking that question often and repeatedly allows us, or paves a path towards this desired state of feeling.
Well, there's so much to work with from this episode. I've been on this journey for a long time and still things come up. And for some reason, I had visuals in my mind of the things that I still need to work on, where I am still allowing them to stay in the darkness. And so I'm sure so many listeners are feeling the same way. So for those who are resonating and want to learn more about you and your book and how to work with you, where's the best place for them to connect?
Our website's the best place. So Beqoming with a Q instead of a C.me. And if you go there, you'll be able to see the offerings we have. We have 2 versions of our online and offline transformational process called the Beqoming process. We have the book, obviously, which you can purchase on the website. You can also get the audiobook on Amazon or the paperback on Amazon. You can sign up for our mailing list. You can sign up to receive the 3 stages of Beqoming directly to your inbox, which is a pretty comprehensive little journey into our ecosystem and into our personal lives as we've navigated these different dimensions. And, we've chosen to share our journey very vulnerably. And that's, I think, what sets us apart from a lot of other personal development brands, is like front and center is, here's our light, here's our shadow, here's our love, here's our fear, here's all the challenges that we've had to embrace, within ourselves and within our relationship. Because we really believe that what we need now more than ever is case studies, people who are actually doing the work, who are in the field, and who are willing to share what they're learning transparently with others. So if you want to be a part of that discovery process, then join us.
All the links for this episode will be at mindlove.com/X80. Your challenge for this week is to reflect on a past experience and try to see it from a new perspective. This is one of the most powerful ways that I was actually able to heal from my past trauma, but also connect to the soul curriculum of it. I spent a really long time in victim mentality, in seeing all of these things that happened to me, thinking that life was unfair, thinking that, like I said, I was a victim. And while I could argue for years about how that is true, and I could get most people to agree with me, I had to eventually ask myself, is this perspective helping my life, or is it keeping me stuck? And the truth was, it was keeping me stuck. If everything happened to me, then I had no power in the situation. And once I started to see that it was up to me to take responsibility for my own life, then I started to see a path forward. I started to see that the lessons I learned in that experience. I started to even understand things that the current me, the me that had already adopted the growth from the situation, how that me would have responded in the situation. Now, that's not to say that I have any regrets, that I shouldn't have done certain things, that I got myself into this mess. But it is to say that this version of me is stronger and wiser and got the lessons that she came here for. I've used this activity when I am having trouble getting over maybe a past fight with somebody, a lost boyfriend, a lost friend, a lost job. And I just want to reiterate that none of this is ever saying that you are at fault for terrible things that happen to you. It's just saying that it's your responsibility to decide what you're going to do with that so that you can move forward and still have a beautiful, fulfilling life. So let me know what you come up with. Reach out to me on Instagram at mindlovemelissa or leave a comment right on the show notes page at mindlove.com/X80. If you'd love to support the show, you can do so by joining Mind Love Premium at mindlove.com/premium. I did mention exclusive episode 17 at mindlove.com/X17 that is available for premium members. Also, I want to remind you, if you are a premium member, you do need to import your private feed that gives you the entire backlog of exclusive episodes plus ad-free episodes of all of them, as well as early releases sometimes when I have my shit together. So do that by joining Mind Love Premium at mindlove.com/premium and making sure to read your welcome email so you know how to easily, in one step, import your feed. You can also support one of my amazing sponsors or leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you do leave a 5-star review, I just might read it on the show. And that's all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next time.